our series, COVID-19 Vaccines Explained. Episode 40 is a 4-part series on COVID-19 Vaccines Explained with Kiran Krishnan. Part 3 compares Pfizer, Moderna, and the Johnson & Johnson vaccines. We'll learn what their differences are and how innovative modern vaccine technology is being used differently than the older vaccine methods. And finally, Part 4 is about after you've been vaccinated, what do you need to know and how safe are you? Part 3 coming up just after this. Hey mamas, did you know that fermented foods literally can bring about health and happiness? As we've talked about on previous CoronaMama episodes, microbiome, nutrition, and mental wellness are directly linked. And as these studies show, our health, inflammation, and disease depends upon our digestion. Research has shown a connection between your gut health and your brain's health. Your digestion can have a positive or a negative effect on your brain's health and mental well-being. Tiny microbes help us to digest food that we otherwise can't, but it's what we feed our microbes that also helps us to manage weight, fight off infections, and can even alter our mood. People with more diverse microbiomes tend to be healthier and happier overall. You should know, though, that not all fermented foods are equally good for you. So, where can you find the naturally fermented foods chock full of probiotics that are good for your microbiome health? Well, right here at Maui Bees in Upcountry Kula. Maui Bees is a locally owned farm stand and kitchen open for breakfast and lunch. Their fermented foods include a variety of small batch sauerkrauts, Chef Larry's kimchi, and their home-brewed fermented drink called June. They also offer farm-fresh organic produce, sourdough bread, and lots of healthy treats, and an outdoor space to bring your family. This health info is brought to you by Maui Bees in collaboration with Chew on This Media. Be sure to let them know that you heard about Maui Bees from the CoronaMama show to get your 10% discount. Today we're talking about COVID-19 Vaccines Explained with Kiran Krishnan. Kiran is a clinical research microbiologist. He has spent several years in the research and development fields of molecular medicine and microbiology at the University of Iowa. In his postgraduate, he worked on the development of the HIV vaccine using live viruses. He's a frequent lecturer on the human microbiome at medical and nutritional conferences. He is currently involved in 9 novel human clinical trials on probiotics and the human microbiome. Kiran is the Chief Scientific Officer at Microbiome Labs. He's on the Scientific Advisory Board or Science Advisor for 7 other companies in the microbiome and nutritional health industry. The natural question for moms is, how do we choose? How do we advise our parents? How do we choose for ourselves or our families?
Yeah, this becomes kind of a conversation between yourself and your doctor and where you are mentally with this whole thing. I know a lot of people that are like, you know what, I'm not afraid of the virus. I don't care if I get it. And so I'm not touching this whole thing. And then I know a lot of people who are like, I want this to be done. I'm not interested in getting sick. I don't want to transmit it. So if this is helping, then I'm going to take the vaccine, right? So I can share my personal views. This is not what I impose on anybody else, and nor am I giving anyone advice. But for me personally, when it becomes available to me, I would take it, only because the data is becoming really clear. And I'm a science person, right? So I'm not thinking about things from conspiracy mindsets and things like that. Like, I'm just looking at it purely from the data. And the data is pretty clear that it dramatically reduces your risk for infection, and it dramatically reduces your risk of transmitting the infection to somebody else, which is the part that I'm really concerned about, right? I might get the disease and be able to deal with it within my system if I'm relatively healthy, but I am concerned about being a vector transmitting it to somebody else, especially during that pre-symptomatic state where I don't know I have it, right? And things are opening up, right? You can have now dinner indoors in Chicago with the table of 6, and we want to get together with people. Right? I want to see family more. I want to get together with my friends, and people will start doing that. But I also don't want to be the guy that got everyone at the table sick,
Right.
And so,
No one wants to be that guy.
no, and that guy sucks in many ways, right? And then the problem is maybe everyone you're hanging out with is younger and healthier, and they're fine, but then they may transmit it to their mom or grandma, and through the lines of transmission, somebody's going to get to the house, end up in the hospital, and somebody may die, right? And I don't want to be responsible for that, right? So, and not to blame people that have transmitted to others before. Most people don't know that they have it. That's where the danger lies, right? Because you will be transmitting it unknowingly. So I want to try to reduce that as part of my world, and I want to be more comfortable getting together with people. So when it becomes available to me, I would take it. I'm not concerned about the safety. There doesn't seem to be any data that indicates it's any more unsafe than anything else I've ever put in my body. From a like a Tylenol or whatever antibiotics you've taken in your life and so on. And there's no reason to think that there will be any sort of long-term impact or anything like that.
So here's a question that I think, it's not asking you to answer which brand is the best, but sort of as you alluded to, like Tylenol, acetaminophen, like Advil, or some other brand, they have different ways that they work on the same symptom. So in a sense, could you maybe help us out with, would there be a difference between the three that are available or soon to be available, and why we would take one versus the other? I mean, the J&J is single shot, so of course everyone's like, I want that one. I only want to get poked once. But what would you say if you were to explain, if there is a difference in how we would choose?
Yeah, based on the data, there's a very minuscule difference. They all so far, and of course, there's more data on the first two, on the Moderna and the Pfizer, because it's been out longer and there's a lot more people that have had it. The J&J vaccine is mostly trial data still, right? So, but it's still, the data looks great. And so it looks about where these two vaccines were during that part of their trials. So I would say in general, they all work about the same. They will all do the job of reducing transmission, reducing your risk for hospitalization and death, reducing risk of picking it up and picking up the virus and so on. If there was a choice, if I had a choice, maybe I'd pick the Pfizer, just because there's even more data on the Pfizer vaccine than any of the other ones. But if tomorrow I was called and they said the Moderna is available or Johnson & Johnson's available, I wouldn't say no. I wouldn't say I'm waiting for the Pfizer vaccine, right? They're all pretty much equivalent. And I would say the most important thing is just, whatever you can get, right? Whatever becomes available to you. Right. And it's pretty clear from data from places like Israel and even the UK, where they've got wider distribution per 100,000 people than we do, that the more people that have it, the better it is. Transmissions go down, hospitalizations and mortality goes way down. And so it's going to save a lot of lives. And I for one, I'm going to do my part to kind of be a part of that, to reduce people's risk.
I have a question about, it's not for the individual necessarily, but pulling back to look at this as a community or nation, having a variety of vaccines, I've heard, is actually good for future possibility of outbreaks of other things. And we're going to get into variants and mutations, but why would that be?
A variety of these kinds of vaccines, meaning having like these three?
These three, and maybe if any others come about.
Yeah, in part because, they will each have slight differences in what kind of variants they can be more protective against, right? Like I mentioned, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine seems to be even more protective against the new variants that are kind of making their way through than the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines. And so if you have all three of the vaccines in the population, you're going to get a certain degree of protection against quite a variety of variants. Now, also, the more people that are protected against picking up the infection, the less risk there is for variants to develop, right? Because remember, variants develop in us. We are the incubator for creating a new variant, right? So when we get infected, the virus, when it takes over your cellular machinery to translate its to transcribe its DNA to mRNA, then to protein, it makes mistakes during that process, and that's what creates new variants. So the more a virus is allowed to circulate through a population, the more likely we will develop variants, right? So if we have good protective vaccines in the ecosystem, and it's reducing transmission, then it reduces the risk of developing new variants.
When we thought of having the vaccines, there was sort of this sense of relief, like, okay, we're nearing the end. And then I think I had heard on my like NPR a little echo dot, like about the variant, and it just like viscerally made me stop and just go, what?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of parents have had that same thing that I've talked to.
Yeah, so mutations occur all the time during viral replication during the course of your infection. Whether or not a mutation becomes a new variant depends on natural selection for the virus. For example, a lot of the mutations that may occur while the virus is using your cellular machinery to rebuild or replicate itself, some of those mutations are actually probably not favorable to the virus. It screws up some aspect of its envelope so the virus doesn't form properly, or it makes a change to the spike protein where now it can't bind to your ACE2 receptor. So some of the mutants may not end up being favorable to the virus and may never become a variant. If there is a mutation that helps the virus be a better virus, from the virus's perspective, the best virus is one that transmits really easily and doesn't kill its host as easily, right? So that's why the common cold virus, things like herpes, these are fantastic viruses from the virus perspective. HPV, right, because they transmit quite easily and then they can just remain in you forever. At least in the case of herpes or HPV, the cold virus, you get it, your body fights it off, but then it can come back. You can get the cold multiple times a year. So you don't have really strong defenses against it. The virus can still use you as a host, but it doesn't do it in a way that actually harms the host, right? So the virus needs the host. So as mutations create a variant with those new characteristics, then those variants can become more prevalent because they tend to survive through transmission better, right? So if there's two mutants inside your body and one mutant compromise its ability to transmit, and the other one enhanced its ability to transmit, you're likely going to transmit the new variant that is more transmissible. So that's how these variants develop. So mutations are occurring all the time. Some of those mutations will lead to new characteristics that help that virus become more prevalent. So that's where the new variants come from.
Now, I heard something about, this may be, a really rare case. I heard something on NPR again about this man who was admitted to a hospital and he was infected. His infection reoccurred over 5 months, and he's not a long hauler. So this is kind of a rare thing, but he's still really infectious. And they found that the virus was mutating very quickly and evading his immune system, creating more than 20 mutations. He happened to be on immunosuppressive drugs. So is this something we need to worry about? Just not maybe many people have this situation, but if there are those who do, they could respread it through the population again? And this is like, I know it's a kind of rare, crazy question, but just wondering.
Yeah, that's it. I think it's an important thing for people to understand. If you have a certain degree of protection against this type of virus, then the likelihood that it'll spread as easily as it did the first time it came out is much more reduced, right? So as the population has dealt with SARS-CoV-2 and variants of SARS-CoV-2, whether through vaccine or through natural infection, then the ability of new variants to infect large numbers of the population is much more lowered than it was 12 months ago, right? So even though some people may be churning out new variants in their system, their ability to actually transmit that and make that a new outbreak is actually dramatically reduced.
I have a question from a Maui mom. Bree Hill is asking, what's the level of concern regarding antibody-dependent enhancement vaccines? Enhanced disease from vaccinations as the immunity begins to wane or due to new variants?
Yeah, so there is very little evidence on that happening, certainly in SARS-CoV-2 and this current vaccine. And that's a natural factor that can occur through natural infections as well, right? So it's not something that is specific to vaccination. So that kind of rare situation can happen just because you picked up the virus naturally, or you picked up the flu virus or the cold virus. So that's one of those things that has been taken and misconstrued as part of a kind of a conspiracy-ish theory thing that's been kind of populating through the internet. But that whole principle can exist no matter what the source of infection, whether it's natural or through a vaccination. But again, it's an extremely rare thing that has not been seen so far in COVID, the natural infection, or through vaccination.
Okay, well, thank you for answering that question. Who should get vaccinated? I know older people and people who are exposed, like teachers and hospital workers, are first in line. Stay tuned for the final part 4 of COVID-19 Vaccines Explained with Kiran Krishnan. And here's how you can follow Kiran and connect with him. Here's our program disclaimer, basically saying you should talk to your doctor about what is right for you. And this is for informational purposes only, recorded with as much accuracy and best knowledge at the time of this recording. And please know that we do our best to publish fair, accurate, truthful, and helpful information. Thanks for watching.